Follow Your Heart t-shirt on, and I've got my books all spread in front of me. And in the History Reset series, my first segment was about the British monarchy and where it derived and where it's going and all that, yada, yada, yada. Well, like Star Trek, I started at the end, and now I have to go back to the beginning. And the beginning is, well, where did life come from in the first place? And there's some issue about that because in academia and in the government, they insist that life evolved out of the slime, by itself, with no initiating intelligence. But we have history to talk about where life historically showed up. And I'm going to go back with Ashiana Dean's Voyagers 2. This book is like, well, it was dictated at stream of consciousness, and so it's like a phone book that's got scrambled, okay? Thank goodness for the index. But it's just a plain chronology of what happened, and it starts 550 million years ago. Now, I'm not going to start that far back. It's just too arcane for our use, okay? So I'm going to start with 3 questions that arise for people who read the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Bible. There are 3 issues in the Bible that really bother me, all right? And the first one has to do with the creation of the world. And let me read you a little bit of this, because what it said is when the planetary sovereign got here, the world was in a mess. It was a mess. He had to fix it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Okay? And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good and separated the light from the darkness. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." Do you make any sense of this? And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, and so on and so forth. And there was an evening and a morning the 3rd day." Now, according to the arcane, profane history, the ground that we're walking on experienced a collision. And when the planetary sovereign got here, he was viewing wreckage. It was wreckage. And the Sumerian cuneiform tablets tell that story. And Zechariah Sitchin tells that story. You might find it in EnkiSpeaks.com or just Google it. The story of the collision between Nibiru, Earth, and Tiamat. Okay. And in this book, that collision is tangentially referred to, but in the Sitchin account, what happens is that Earth is a crystal and shatters. Nibiru gets knocked into another less favorable long 3,600-year orbit. And Tiamat gets slammed on to an ice sheet. And that implies that we live on Tiamat. Okay, isn't that interesting? And in some maps that I have found, our world is represented as a northern hemisphere on a flat surface. Okay, isn't that interesting? So there was a lot of destruction when Terra a large planet blew up 550 million years ago, and that formed planets and asteroids and so forth. But the purpose of the human interaction, the intelligent interaction with these planets, is that the souls who live here, there, and everywhere, when they're through with their material physical existence, go through a process called ascension. Ascension. In planetary ascension, the process involves transmutation of particles and antiparticles into progressively less dense states of matter, through which a planetary body is able to change from lower dimensional frequency bands into higher dimensional frequency bands of the 15-dimensional scale. I'm going to give you a picture I have of the first 10 dimensions. I don't have all 15. Ascension also involves the understanding of morphogenic fields or form-holding energy constructions that allow matter and antimatter particles to build into individuated form. The process of personal ascension involves precisely the same process, as the human is part of the greater morphogenic field of the planet, and the progression of dimensional ascension of the human and the planet are intimately intertwined. Okay. And so in another part of Voyagers 2, she says, 25 million years ago, now we're moving up a little bit, the first seeding of the angelic race, the angels were first, took place here in this galaxy in the Lyran system. That seeding of angelic hominids was destroyed during the electric wars 5.5 million years ago. Then there was a second seeding, and it was destroyed in the 1,000 Years' War. I think they have wars for fun, you know. After that, there was a treaty the Elanu arrived at, and an agreement between some of the fallen and Anu Elohim races and the Emerald Covenant races, the Christos founders races, that an attempt for the third seeding on this planet would not be stopped. Now, we who are left now are involved in that treaty because the terms of that treaty are similar to the terms of the Greada Treaty that Eisenhower signed in 1954 and that Bush signed in the Tau 9 Treaty in 2005. So that Elanu Treaty is really important to us now, and that's why I'm digging into this. All right, now, you know, some of this is in my book, Come Let Us Make Man in Our Image, all right? But it speaks mostly of artifacts, races, and tangible things. Today, I'm talking about the intangibles, okay? So, warring stopped, but in return for ceasing the conflict, the Anunnaki, who immigrated by way of their wormwood system into the solar system in which we live, were to do bioregenesis outside the Emerald Covenant. The Emerald Covenant forbade it. The stipulations in which were that no racial or physical bioregenesis development is permitted whatsoever. So what genetic work is being done now, I don't know under what agreement it is done. That races were and are sacrosanct, with superior races and inferior races, with ideological purity and a hierarchical and bureaucratic system of influence that guarantees top-down rulership. What do you mean by hierarchical states? Okay, here's the book that talks about the universe hierarchy in 2,069 pages, sections 1, 2, and 3. And according to this book, which was dictated to a committee in Chicago in, I believe, the 1930s, who just took it downstream of consciousness, like Voyagers 2, and like my own book, I have one stream of consciousness also. Okay, this talks about how the universe is organized, bottom up and top down, both directions. Okay. Now, this is important because it affects us. The LNU agreement was precedent for today's practice by Alpha Draconians, Orions, and Greys of abducting and utilizing humans and their genomes for their own DNA repair. All right? Abductions. This agreement was never been rescinded despite outcomes of suffering and woe that humans experience from it, because the Christos founders still insist on racial purity. The way this insistence plays out is civil society based on Christos founders cull, that is, they kill, non-conforming hybrids. There's no such thing as racial tolerance. Emerald Covenant races became the founders of Anunnaki Illuminati doctrines of genocide against racially mixed divergent peoples, permissive ideologies, and dissident individuals. Now, this culling process was abrogated and became obsolete with the onset of the Age of Aquarius, December 21st, 2012, okay? But the practice of cultural annihilation continues as serial wars today. The rationale for gods to exterminate evolved souls is that they are troublemakers. Therefore, the balance of population will conform and experience peace. But the outcome is terror and tyranny. No one dares quibble nor question. In the founders' model, whole populations are taken out whose belief systems are harmless, even 11th and 12th density, 10th density hominid souls, merely out of preferences of founders for racial purity. Racial purity, impossible. Now, I've mentioned some parties to this treaty, and you might be saying, well, what's that got to do with God? And that's a good question, because I'm trying to locate which side of this war he's on. We know he's not on Lucifer's side. We know that for certain, because there's so much in Scripture to condemn and castigate Lucifer. So let's figure out where Lucifer is. At the time, Yahweh, his representative by the name of Enlil, joined with Anunnaki rebels to continue fundamental development and improvements to DNA codes. He had a fundamental right to do so and a further interest from creation's beginning. So Yahweh can always personally do genetic engineering, but can Lucifer? Yahweh's bloodline balked at the 10th and 11th density stargates, a holocaust of the innocent. Infighting began, and it spread to draconians who are predatory by nature, not pastoral. They had to kill for meat, but they refused to eat 10th and 11th density humans. That was beyond the pale. Yet still being condemned because of their refusal to carry out annihilation orders, they began to stonewall and enact policies of domination against Gate 11 and Gate 10 rebels who felt they were right. Yahweh Elohim commissioned High Council, now called Ancient of Days, the Eli Elohim, asking for relief from the draconian raids. The High Council returned, "You are just as out of control as draconians." Well, that's where we are now. "Sit down and let's settle this." Enlil's choice to diverge from Christos founders occurred when he realized that God could create an alternate life path not out of culling nonconformist humans, but by ordering behavior according to law and only cutting off the truly incorrigibly harmful. It was a new paradigm in favor of consenting to law over racial pride. And this new paradigm was summarily unrecognized by the High Council, even though Yahweh, the sovereign, was acting in his primary capacity to evolve hominids in a new direction, a right and privilege he enjoys as a galactic sovereign. As history has been written, Yahweh and Enlil's plan was designed to weed out genetic weaknesses and character flaws of Anunnaki crossbred humans until only those who were obedient and biddable to harmless behavior remained to inherit kingdom sovereignty. Under Enlil's supervision, a dualistic reality was allowed in which humans could explore choice and have free agency to follow a plan of salvation, okay, which is not the same as ascension. Degrees of glory were offered, a belief system model of ascendancy that would stream humans after mortal death into various levels of responsibility. As such, the plan did not guarantee everyone's redemption. The less obedient would be denied access to further endowments, thereby sorting the gene pool and giving precedence to those who would most advance the more civil lineage and agenda of shared immortal relationship. All right, so Yahweh was for the free spirit, the free mind, to consent to law freely, either consent or not consent. All right. That was his position. And he and Enlil and some of the angels objected to the arbitrary culling of innocent people on the grounds that they were racial hybrids. And this is why when Moses left Egypt and brought the Hebrews to wherever they were going, there was a large mixed race company that went with them, and race was not a matter that is addressed in the Torah in holy law. And holy law, and I'll leave you a link to it. I have a page where it's all categorized and organized and simple, really simple to understand. What you see is that it's a empirical, practical, step-by-step ethic of doing good to get a good outcome, refraining from doing what's harmful, and correcting the people who do harm. All right, so in the first part of Genesis, we see that the world we live on was not a spinning ball when God got here, all right? And we see maps that are not spinning balls, especially the USGS map and the UN map. So we're being fed dogma about the shape of the earth, which is part of the imperial desire to get us to accept dogma. And we're going to be tripping on dogma all the time. Now, the second part of the Bible that brought up a question was in Genesis chapter 3. Okay, we've already talked about all kinds of races being allowed to come here, all right, in the third seeding. And we've already talked about a disagreement, a conflict between the Christos founders and the Anu Elohim over who's going to be allowed to continue and who's going to get called. We have another conflict in the Bible in Genesis 3:15 when God, speaking to Adam after Adam and Eve disobeyed his instructions, says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, we only have 4 characters here. We have the serpent and the serpent seed. We have the human and the human seed. There's a problem. There are other seeds. The other seeds are not spoken of in this beginning, this primary, this first prophecy about how the whole thing's going to work out. And this gets complicated because then in chapter 6 of Genesis, when man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they were born children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. They were the Nephilim. What's the problem with that? We have angels. We know we have Nephilim. We have fallen angels and faithful angels and Nephilim. Well, what's the matter? Well, what about the rest of them? Okay. What about the Greys and the Anunnaki? And okay. And what happened to the Lyrans? Where did they go? Where did the rest of the races go? And the rest of the Bible is about resolving this conflict between the angel Lucifer and God's woman, and Satan is in there. Satan, some people say Lucifer and Satan are the same person. No, believe me, they're not the same person. They're different, and they have different outlooks and philosophies, but we'll get that to that another time. All right, so that until we get to Ezekiel, where Ezekiel witnesses a UFO with wheels upon wheels with flashing lights and all of that. And then there is a comment in the book of Jude about the angels who forsook their position and did something. But the Bible is empty, absolutely empty of ETs, UFOs, and the conflicts that come about because of their presence. I hope I'm making sense now. Okay. So in the society that Moses created, their law was a form of common law. It was very similar to the Code of Hammurabi. It was very similar to English common law. There was no doctrine in there. Strangers are supposed to be treated with the same consideration as natural people or citizens, so long as their behavior conforms to the societal standards of behavior. And what the Holy Law of Moses does is set up standards of behavior. And here, let me give you the link. Whoops. I'm going to learn how to. There. Okay, there's the link to a copy of the law, and you may want to look through it sometime. And you'll notice that it's based on positive actions. It's based on doing the right thing in each kind of circumstance, whether you're showing respect at the shul or the Sunday meeting or the Sabbath meeting or wherever you're showing respect to God, or whether you're showing respect to your brothers or sisters or family. You're showing respect to animals, which is called kashrut. You're showing respect to the weakness of women, which is called mikvah and niddah. You're showing respect to your children by teaching your children. You're showing respect to the farmland by rotating your crops. You're showing respect to farm animals by not being cruel to them. Basically, it's all about showing respect. And that's the way things were until the Hebrew people became, let's just say, infused with the Babylonian doctrines that had come from the Anunnaki, who aren't spoken of in this book. You see, the Anunnaki were a third power center that the Bible doesn't discuss directly. And that term the seed of the serpent is actually the seed of the Anunnaki two-headed eagle philosophical stance, which you find in Buddhism, which you find in Hinduism, in which both good and evil have equal part in the social fabric, unlike the Mosaic law, in which every act and every behavior is directed toward telling the truth and doing the right thing, not necessarily for the right reason. It took Jesus Christ a couple centuries later, a couple of millennia later, to take the behaviors of the law in Matthew 5:16 through 21 and specify, yes, you have to do all that and create good outcomes, but you also have to do it from a pure motive. And so his teachings on behavior are all about having a pure motive. Okay. And that's what makes Christians different from most other philosophies in our world. But it makes Christians similar to the people on Lyra who were annihilated because they were naive and only looked at the good and never paid much attention to how treachery and deceit and deception operated. All right. And Christianity has had the same history and the same experience of persecution and violence that the Lyrans had, because they're so trusting, because they're so truthful. They either have to hide from the world of treachery and gaming, social gaming, or they become victims of it. All right. So Jesus taught all about doing things the way the Lyrans did. And the outcome was exactly the same, that in the last 1,400 years, about 280 million Christians have been slaughtered, martyred, sacrificed to the imperial archetype of the Anunnaki society, which operates from a fifth dimensional orientation. Now, what's a fifth dimensional orientation? All right, I talked about Mosaic law, which is all behavioral, and it's all about acts of positive expectation to get a good outcome. All right. Fifth dimensional orientation, which is taught by the Masons, the Rosicrucians, and the chivalric orders, because they're the mysteries and the secrets of the Anunnaki. Fifth dimensional orientation is completely different from problem solving. In fifth dimensional orientation, life is a hologram in which we manifest our wishes. We manifest by sharing our thoughts with other like people, like attracts like, and we all pray together for an outcome that will bless us. Okay, it's just us. It's not justice. It's just us. Fifth dimensional orientation is each thought group, each sect, each faction is praying to manifest what they themselves and them only want to manifest. It's purely selfish, because in the timeless eternity of the fifth dimension, which has overcome the aging process, that's the fourth dimension is time. When you've overcome time and your body is not aging and you have all the time in the universe, there's room for everyone to manifest their expectation and their wish, who collects together in a like-minded group of thinkers and prayers. That's how it works in fifth dimension. That's not how it works in third dimension. In third dimension, if you want to manifest something, you're going to have to go build it, honey. You got to find your resources and gather your labor, and you got to put brick on brick in third dimension. In fifth dimension, you gather your friends and you all say a prayer and your manifestation shows up. It's like a holodeck. From fifth dimension upward is like a holodeck. And heaven is like a holodeck, okay? Where every manifestation is someone else's illusion. That's the difference between third dimensional problem solving versus fifth dimensional wishcraft. That's what fifth dimension is. And so when we look at the Sumerian cuneiform tablets and we see the history of the kings, of the history of their kings were part of the large people. Okay, there was the Nephilim that are the large people, but there are other large people. There are the Agarthians who are underground. There are the Bigfoot people who are telepathic. They're primarily telepathic, and they're mostly underground, okay? And there have been the red-headed mound builders in North America who are from 6 to 10 feet tall. The Bigfoot are 6 to 10 feet tall. The Agarthians are 12 to 15 feet tall. The Anunnaki are 12 to 15 feet tall. And so the larger people having a larger brain case, frankly, are a whole bunch more intelligent than we are. But because the Bible cursed and framed the Nephilim as being only always bad, the larger people have been cursed to run from us, okay? You notice in Africa, the Watusis, the large people, have been largely killed off by the pygmies, all right? We have a few of the large people remaining with us now. You can see quite a few pictures of extraordinary sized people on the internet, people who average, 7 to 9 feet tall, who live in modern times and who don't fit in at all. I mean, they just really have a hard time. And they're considered freaks. But the truth is, the matter is, we're the freaks. We're the little people. And we are so tiny. You see it, I see it when I re-render moon images. And there are large figures and they're little tiny figures. Scaling of the human genome can occur at any scale. You can have a human a foot tall, or as we have found, the bones of humanoids up to 36 feet tall. And they come even taller than that in the higher dimensions, because as they spread out according to higher frequencies of their atomic mass, their bodies spread out. And you can have a human figure 600 feet tall or a mile tall, okay? And so the scaling has been the real problem for NASA, that pictures of hominid human life anywhere, that they've all been rubbed out, all right? But the truth is that humans can be scaled to any size. And in our world, we who live surrounding, with the ocean surrounding us, in the center of where Tiamat used to be, we are the little ones. And the Agarthians and the Nephilim and the Anunnaki and the Bigfoot are fleeing to the outer perimeter around the ice wall that contains our oceans, all right? And so we have come to be in a position where we are the little people over whom factions of ETs are now fighting over us and over our territory. And that's why we have the fight between the deep state and the sovereignty movement. That explains where we are today. Now, one of the things that Ashiana Dean brings out in this book is that the fight was supposed to be over in 2017. All right, the whole thing was supposed to have been resolved, but it hasn't happened yet. It can still go any which way. And the trick is to figure out who's on which side. Who's on the side of population reduction by sterilization, abortion, fluoride in the water, GMO crops that wreck the digestion of anybody who eats them, contaminated pharmaceuticals, okay, 5G or 6G. Who's on the side of diminishing the human family, and who's on the side of preserving, evolving, and developing and educating the human family? This is what we have to assess, you in your life and me in mine. And I can't tell you who's who, because this is our test of our soul's ability to figure out what's true. Okay? We have to figure out what's true. And that's the test of our soul. Now, if you think that the tribulation and revelation is all in front of us, I hate to disabuse you, because we have had reset after reset since the flood of Noah's day. If you look at the mud flood and reset history using any search engine, you find out that society after society, there are 15 cities that were covered by water, and there were several cities that were bombed by balls of sulfur, and there are several cities that have been completely inundated in mud, all right? So that the outcome of revelation has occurred and occurred and occurred over and over again. As we see the Vatican and the Masons, when there's a certain amount of treachery going on in the society, they say, oh, this must be the time for the revelation, so we better start up some wars so that we can get saved and delivered from the wars. You see how that can perpetuate itself, which it has, all right? One of the things I discovered in my research was that there was a peaceful millennium already. It already happened. The millennium already happened. And when it happened was when in 586 BC, the temple at Jerusalem was destroyed and there was a diaspora. And the 12 tribes, or most of, or a lot of, the 10 or 12 tribes of Israel migrated north, okay? They migrated up to Britain and Scandinavia. And from 500 BC until 500 AD, the Celts lived in relative peace, except for some people trying to invade them, but their society built on the Mosaic law and built on their clannish concept of community. And the Hebrew law is a clan concept of community. It is not a codified governing system. You see what I mean? The Celts in Ireland and Scotland, coming down to England, and also coming down from the Atlanteans that were at the North Pole that got flooded, who came down through Siberia into Scandinavia. Okay. They had a society that regulated itself without writing. It was narrative. It was handed down verbally. So that in 500 AD, when the empire, which was just another iteration of the Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Grecian, Roman, Tartarian Empire, invaded Britain, they brought writing. They brought codification of law. They brought business. They brought commerce. And that's what broke the back of the Celtic verbal Brehon Law, it was called. Brehon Law. And it was about justice, not just us. And it was about assessing the condition of an accused to see whether he was whether it was a low person or a high person. And if a person committed a crime and they were a low person, there was a great deal of mercy. But if there was a high person, there was a very severe execution. Now, Jesus was a high person because he was part of the bloodline of the King of Judah. And so he was executed as a high person, very severely. Okay. Next time we'll get into the story of Jesus, because the contradictions that I have found, I'm still not really steady on. There's a problem with chronology. The Colburn Bible gives him one date of birth, and the Hebrew scriptures gives him a different date of birth. So I'm just, like 1,075 years apart now. Which is which? Okay. How do we resolve that? All right. So what this comes down to is that in fulfilling the scriptural prophecies that are only between the Sumerian, Babylonian, imperial perspective of double-headed eagle, good and evil together, coexist in society. That's why we have pedophilia, pederasty, prostitution, and all of that being re-entering into the New World Order, because it's an empire in which those practices are acceptable. Whereas in Christianity and Judaism, those practices are against the law. They're unlawful and they're unethical together. All right. That's why we have this clash between ethics. And I noticed that the Pope has taken the side of the empire, that those practices are just as normal as apple pie. I doubt it. I doubt it, because the outcomes of pedophilia, pederasty, and prostitution and child marriage are not good. The outcomes on people are not good, and the breeding of the people deteriorates because the practice of purity, of postponement of satiety is not pursued, of chastity is not pursued, of balance is not pursued. And so that's why we see the terrible consequences of profligacy in sexual matters. How are we doing? Wow. All right. So our Bible does not answer the three questions. What is the shape of our world and its conformation? And if the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent are in this war constantly, time and time and time again, what about the people who are unmentioned, the ETs and the other races, the people who bring in UFOs? I think I'm going to need to take a little break here and get something to drink there. Can we do that, Steve? Good, because I need something to drink right now. Just give me a couple minutes. I'll be right back.